In the small town of Ashford, something was terribly wrong. People didn't just die there, they lingered. Rumors of the walking had always floated around town, dismissed as drunken tales or the result of too much isolation. But after the sudden death of the mayor, those rumors started to feel more like warnings. Rachel, a local teacher, was the first to notice. At night, she heard the sounds, moaning, soft and distant at first, growing louder each day. When she looked out her window, she saw figures shambling down the streets. Their movements were slow, stiff, and deliberate, but what terrified her most were their eyes. They weren't vacant like you'd expect from the dead. They were filled with pain. It wasn't just one or two of them. The entire cemetery had emptied. The dead from decades past were out, walking the streets in search of something or someone. Panic gripped the town. The living locked themselves inside, boarding up windows and doors. But Rachel knew it was only a matter of time before those doors splintered. One night, the moaning stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then the front door creaked open. Rachel's heart dropped. Standing there was her sister, who had died in a car accident 2 years ago. But she wasn't a mindless zombie. She was crying, begging to be let in. Rachel had to make a decision. Open the door and face the nightmare that had once been her family, or stay hidden and pray the dead would move on. She chose to open the door. The moment her sister crossed the threshold, something in her eyes shifted. They went from filled with sorrow to a cold, ravenous hunger. Rachel screamed as she felt the bite, realizing too late that the dead were not looking for peace. They were looking for flesh. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a group of hikers had gone missing. Search parties scoured the forests, but only scraps of clothing and gear were ever found. It became a local mystery, but most people just figured they had gotten lost in the dense wilderness. When Megan and her friends decided to hike the same trail, they didn't think much of the missing people. It was supposed to be a fun weekend trip, away from the noise of the city. But on the second night, as they sat around their campfire, the woods grew eerily silent. The usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves vanished, replaced by a low, guttural growling. Megan saw it first, a pale, decayed hand gripping a tree trunk in the distance. Then another. Soon figures began to emerge from the shadows, dozens of them. Their faces were gaunt, their flesh gray and rotting. Their eyes, milky white, held no life, only hunger. The stench was unbearable, a mix of rotting meat and damp earth. Panicked, the group ran, but the zombies were relentless, following their every move. They seemed to know the woods better than the living, cutting off paths and herding Megan and her friends deeper into the forest. After hours of running, Megan stumbled into an old, abandoned cabin. She locked herself inside, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the slow, scraping sound of the zombies outside, dragging their feet as they circled the cabin. Then she heard something worse, a whisper. It came from inside the cabin, a low, rasping voice. Megan turned slowly and saw them. More zombies, but these were different. They were the missing hikers, and they weren't hungry. They just wanted to talk, to scream their suffering into her ears until she couldn't take it anymore. She tried to cover her ears, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She could feel her sanity slipping away. And just as the door began to crack under the pressure of the undead outside, she realized the awful truth. There was no escape. Once the woods took you, you were theirs forever. Dr. Ethan Caldwell had always been obsessed with finding a cure for death. His research into cellular regeneration was groundbreaking, promising, but deeply controversial. He was convinced that if he could control the body's natural decay, he could unlock the key to immortality. The problem was, every test subject, whether it was a lab rat or a human cadaver, came back wrong. One night, in the dark basement of his secluded laboratory, Ethan injected a freshly deceased patient with his latest serum. The body convulsed, and for a brief moment its eyes flickered open. Ethan watched in awe as the heart started beating again, slowly at first, then stronger. It had worked, or so he thought. The patient didn't speak, didn't move much at all, but the brain activity showed signs of life. Ethan left for the night, excited to report his findings to the medical community. When he returned the next morning, the lab was in chaos. The patient was gone. The steel door leading to the hallway twisted off its hinges. The building's security footage revealed the horror. The revived corpse had attacked the night guards, tearing into them with a ferocity that was beyond human. And worse, the guards had risen too. Ethan ran to his office, trying to seal himself inside, but it was too late. The patient, now a mindless, decaying shell of its former self, stumbled into the room. It didn't attack him, not immediately. It stood there staring, as though it remembered him somehow. But then it lunged. Ethan felt the teeth sink into his arm, the hot, fetid breath of the thing against his skin. He managed to inject himself with an emergency dose of the serum, hoping to counteract the infection. But as his vision blurred and his limbs grew numb, he realized with a sickening dread that he wasn't stopping death. He was simply delaying it, one painful bite at a time. Now, as the infection spread through his body, he could feel the change coming. He knew it was only a matter of time before he joined his creations, forever trapped in a decaying body, cursed to hunger for the flesh of the living.